This is Al Wood, Field Crops Agent for the Passaic County Center of the North Carolina Cooperative Extension Service. Today I'm going to be sharing some information with you about soybeans. Profitability of any business is of utmost importance and is no less important of a concept for agriculture. One of the strategies used in agriculture to enhance profitability is to maximize yields. A production system that has helped increase yields for soybeans is the early planted, early matured soybean production system. It was the universities and extension services of the Mid-South states that released the publication Early Soybean Production System Handbook in September of 1988 that reported the benefits of this system. The basis of this system was to achieve higher yields than were currently being achieved with traditional maturities of soybeans, maturity groups 5 through 7, with a management system in earlier maturing varieties to avoid dry weather that was limiting yields. In recent years, national, regional, and state yield contest winners have documented that with maturity group 3 and maturity group 4 varieties and an enhanced set of management practices, record-setting yields can be obtained. I surveyed growers at my 2020 soybean production meeting to determine what percent of growers were utilizing the early planted, early maturing soybean production system. Of the 22 growers that completed the survey, 45% indicated that they used this system. The second question asked was, for those that do not use the system, why do you not use it? The number one reason for not using it was does not fit my farming operation, as indicated by 45% of the participants, followed by do not want to stop some other farm tasks, such as picking corn, to pick soybeans, indicated by 32% of the participants, and do not have a grain dryer and grain bins, as indicated by 27% of the participants. The reason does not fit my farming operation probably encompasses the next two most important reasons for not using this system. The point to be made here is that if you cannot be timely with the harvest, it is best that you do not use it. We do not want a product that has issues with quality which affects its marketability. Realizing that there are major issues that must be addressed, I want to now focus on the considerations for adopting the early planted, early maturing soybean production system. The first consideration can be encapsulated with the phrase, this system is not a silver bullet. Although the highly publicized growers are getting higher yields with this system, these same growers were likely using sound production practices in a timely manner with their traditional production system, such as plant nutrition, pest management, etc. This system can translate into higher yields if you put the crop on a firm foundation. Early planting means that planting dates are earlier than traditionally used, which could increase the likelihood of frost or freeze damage. Although it has been documented that a seedling soybean plant can tolerate 4 hours of temperatures at 28 degrees Fahrenheit without damage, some consideration should be given to situations that are conducive to late spring frost or freeze, avoiding fields that are the lowest spot in the landscape, allowing cold air to settle, or fields that rapidly cool down due to radiative cooling at night, such as we see with high organic soils, are ways to minimize the chance of a crop damage or loss. In addition to avoiding the dry periods of the growing season when grain fill is occurring, another benefit of early planting date is providing the crop with a chance to be at the reproductive phase as close to the summer solstice, which is the day with the most hours of daylight and is usually June the 21st, so that the crop can maximize the food production that is funneled into the grain. Also, when thinking about planting date, you may also want to think about what maturity group is best suited for production at those earlier planting dates. A tool developed by the University of Arkansas can help growers think about what maturity groups can be planted at earlier planting dates to try and get the soybeans flowering by mid-June. The following link as seen on the screen will help you with that issue. Regardless of whether you are considering an early planting date or going with your traditional planting date, using well-adapted high-yielding varieties is important. There are numerous sources of information such as company trials, official variety testing programs such as we have at NC State, Extension Center trials, and trials performed by farmers. Just remember that we want to select early maturing varieties that perform well for your area, especially for early planting dates. Another consideration that the growing season is shorter with earlier maturing varieties. In addition to the early planting date, the length of time between emergence and reproduction is shorter for early maturity group 4 than a group 5. For example, a maturity group 4.2 that emerges on April 25th will be flowering on June the 5th, whereas a maturity group 5.2 emerging on the same day, April 25th, will be flowering June the 22nd. This has you operating at a different time of the year, so it is important to be closely watching the development of the crop and carrying out the necessary management practices in a timely manner. In tests conducted by Dr. Jim Dunphy from 2014 to 2018, evaluating various non-foliar yield enhancement products in 15 different environments and analyzed, summarized, and published by Dr. Van in 2019, found that fungicidal seed treatments did not impact soybean yield. However, planting dates for these tests range from late May through early July. The question then arises about the value of fungicidal seed treatments at earlier planting dates. In 2019, Dr. Van, Dr. Foote, and Dr. Thiessen started a multi-year test of soybean seed treatments for 3 planting dates, 3 maturity groups, and 5 fungicide seed treatments compared to an untreated check at 3 locations. The thing to remember with this data is that it is preliminary, and additional years will make the results more definitive. For 2 of the 3 locations, fungicidal seed treatments protected soybean stand. This translated into protection of yield. Soybean yield was protected by the use of a fungicidal seed treatment, and on average, soybean yield by 6 to 7 bushels per acre higher where a fungicidal seed treatment was used. The greatest yield benefit from the use of a fungicidal seed treatment was with the late March planting date at 9.1 bushels per acre, although there was still a 5.9 bushel per acre yield protection when soybeans were planted in mid-April and a 2.4 bushel per acre yield protection when the soybeans were planted in mid-May. No matter what production system you are considering, a sound weed control program is important. The main thing to remember, especially if dealing with herbicide-tolerant weeds, is to use different modes of action and to have different herbicides in place at different times, such as a pre-emergence herbicide followed by a timely post-emergence herbicide along with a residual herbicide. All sorts of pests can be yield robbers, and since we are managing for maximum yields with this production system, we want to be on the watch. As I mentioned earlier, the soybean growing season will be shorter, and with the early planting dates, things may be happening earlier in the year than we are used to. For example, we may have stink bugs showing up earlier in the reproductive phase of the soybean, such as at flowering, or foliar diseases may show up earlier as well. The main thing to remember is to be vigilant for pests because they may show earlier with regards to the calendar. One of the big risks with the early planted, early maturing soybean production system in eastern North Carolina is when these soybeans are getting ready for harvest. A late maturity group 3 to a mid group 4 planted early April will be ready to harvest in late August. At that time of year, not only is it hot and humid, but that is also during the time when hurricanes and tropical storms can occur. Results from a planting date test of a maturity group 3 and a maturity group 4 show the impact of not harvesting soybeans in a timely manner can have on grain quality. The earlier the planting date, the more damaged soybeans there were. Being that this production system will have soybeans ready for harvest at a time that may not be typical for the area, a grower should stay in touch with their local grain buyer. Growers should talk with their buyer even before they plant to discuss whether they will be able to take the soybeans when ready for harvest. Many elevators do not have the capacity to take in corn and soybeans at the same time. As the soybean crop approaches harvest, the grower should again give his buyer a heads up that the soybeans will soon be ready for harvest. This will allow the elevator to make arrangements for receiving the soybeans and help keep down stress between the grower and his buyer, as well as the potential for reduction in grain quality resulting in dockage or loss of crop. Although not unique to this production system, a disorder that has been observed and documented is green stem. A number of factors are blamed for this disorder, but the current thinking among researchers is that it is due to stress the crop experiences during pod and seed development. This has been more frequently reported with maturity group 4.5s to 5.5 varieties. Stress during pod and seed development causes excess photosynthate, or food made by the plant, to remain in the stem, as there is no sink, meaning no seeds and pods to take and utilize that food. As the crop reaches physiological maturity, the crop does not experience normal senescence, resulting in partial defoliation and green stems with the grain ready for harvest. With the hot, humid weather at that time of year, the quality of the soybean can be degraded, or in the most extreme cases, total crop loss can occur if harvest is greatly delayed. A newcomer to the early planted, early maturing soybean production system should start off slow. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. You will be dealing with new things such as the time of harvest being so much earlier in the year when you could be harvesting another crop such as corn. Although I do not have hard data to back it up, I recommend growers not planting more than 15% of their soybean acreage to this system. If you have issues to occur, you do not have a lot of acreage at risk. As a grower becomes familiar with the system, and especially if they have a grain dryer and grain bins, they can increase the number of acres to this system. But if you are in an area with the potential for hurricanes, I would still not want a significant number of acres with this system. I have given you a lot to consider with regards to the early planted, early maturing soybean production system. Each of these points, if appropriately addressed, can take you a long ways towards being successful with this system. With good, timely management and a favorable growing season all the way until the soybeans are in the hopper, could result in this system enhancing the profitability of your soybean crop. If you have questions about the early planted, early maturing soybean production system, contact your local extension center of the North Carolina Cooperative Extension Service, or if in Pasco County, call me, Al Wood, at 252-338-3954.